potent advice, and inspiration from real self-made millionaires. Welcome to The Eventual Millionaire with your host, Jaime Masters.
Welcome to Eventual Millionaire. I'm Jaime Masters, and on the show today we have Michael Baldwin. He's a CEO of Baldwin.com, and they also do corporate branding. He also has an amazing book called Just Add Water, if you can see that right there, all about PowerPoint presentations and how to make them not suck, because most of them do. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And we've tried this is the third time's a charm, right? Fingers crossed, all goes well in the world. Can you explain sort of the branding corporate strategy side? I know you do personal stuff too, but why do we need this at all? And what are sort of the core pieces of what you look at when you come in for working on a brand?
I would say that the people who are traditionally tasked with branding and advertising try to convince the world that it's a dark art that is best left to the experts. And I personally think that they make it way more complicated than it needs to be. So a lot of the work I do with corporate clients has to do with discovering with them the essence of what their brand is, and then the most compelling way to express it.
How do they figure that? I feel like even small business owners have a heck of a time trying to figure out the who they are part. So what are some of those uncovery things that you do to try and figure that out?
One of the things actually I've found that works really well, and this happens before everyone gets in the room, is asking each one of them, in a lot of cases it's board members, what makes them get up in the morning and go to that place? What is driving them to do that versus any other jobs they could possibly do? And that's when you get to a more authentic connection with each individual about the brand and the mission of the brand.
Which is so funny because usually when you think of corporate, you're like, no, we just design it out of thin air. But you actually go and talk to the person and figure out what that is and why do you do that? Why does it have to align with who they are as people?
Because a brand is like a person. And the easiest way I could express this in terms of branding, which is an often used word and misunderstood, like marketing is an often used word and misunderstood. But, a brand is like you or like me. And if I know you, I know that you wouldn't wear a certain piece of clothing, or I knew you wouldn't live in a certain kind of a house or drive a certain kind of a car. And a brand needs to be that specific in people's minds so that you can start to build equity in a consistent way. My three latest words are simplicity, consistency, and durability.
Ooh. Okay, so is this for you specifically or in general? Should we be coming up with 3 words of our own to try and figure out what these pieces are? How do we sort of define what our brand is?
Well, those, just to go back to those 3 words, those 3 words I proselytize in terms of branding.
Okay, great.
So your message needs to be simple. Everything you do that is supported in the context of branding should be consistent. And then it needs to be durable, which means you need to spend the time it takes to get it right first. So you don't, that old rule, if there's never time to do it right, but there's always time to do it over.
Yes. Okay. I love these. Can we walking through a small business owner? Because I don't think we take enough time to go through the foundational stuff. Literally, people think branding are like, oh, it's my logo and colors and go. And what you do is insane for corporations. So how can we as small business owners who don't have a lot of time really make sure that when we're going into this, it is durable? Like you said, we do the foundational piece so that way we don't have to change it. So that way it can take hold. So walk us through sort of a quick step, well, as quick as we can, but a step-by-step process of uncovery for somebody that is a small business owner that really wants to hone in on who they are as a brand.
Logistically speaking, unless that small business owner works by him or herself, there's probably a group of people, founders or board members, and you need those people in the room. But the first 2 questions I ask each person are, what, in your opinion, if you had to pick one word that captures the essence of the brand, what would that one word be?
Nice.
And 2, what in a phrase or a sentence is the mission of the brand? So, in the example I use lately, as one of the most simple examples of simple and clear branding is the TED brand for TED Talks, and the 2 words they use are spreading ideas, which is so simple. And anyone, anyone can understand that. And if you understand TED at all, it makes perfect sense. And somehow, some way, they spent probably a day in a room with the people involved with founding TED and said, how do we want to express what it is our mission is and what we really stand for? And spreading ideas is what they came up with.
And I think it's genius also.
Yeah, they wouldn't need to hire me because I just, you put your finger on it and just make sure that you are consistent with how you express it to all touch points with consumers.
So you give a thumbs up for them. That's great. But what's interesting about them, I think, is that the TED name, who picks TED for a name of a talk, right? And yet it still works really, really well.
Yeah. Well, it stands for, I think, technology, education, and design. I'm pretty sure. It's an acronym. I think those are the 3 words.
Which to me, what's interesting is that because it's become its own brand, we don't even know what the 3 words are, and they expand way past all of those things. They've got some crazy TED Talks that even ones I share with the kiddos where I'm like, wow, this is something I never would have thought about before. But it's less about than the word they use for the thing, but more about what we think of, right? That's sort of the whole point of branding. Okay, right. So if we ask those 2 questions, let's say they're all over the place, and we're like, okay, this is sort of it. What do you do then?
Well, that's when you kind of start the day. And it's a very nonlinear associative process where each person contributes, but there's no real necessarily path that you follow. It's just a matter of having a facilitator. In this case, it would be me, having plenty of either whiteboard space or, I love those little 3M, easels you can rip off. And
I literally have like 7 of them over there in the corner. Hilarious.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. These days, I tell a client, I need a room with the right people and a whiteboard, and that's all I need. And then what happens is funny things happen. You'll say something, or someone will make a remark, or someone will mention a word, and then all of a sudden, it makes a lot of sense. But there's no specific time frame on how it works, or linear process of how it works. But you start with the right people in the right room with those 2 questions, and you don't leave until you get it.
See, this is why it's called dark arts, right? This is why you said that at the beginning. You're like, wait, there's no... Yeah. So how do you know when you get it? Because even if you're spitballing ideas and having fun and writing stuff on the board, how do you know when you're like, oh my gosh, this is it, and you can actually leave the room?
Because I would say 2 reasons. Because number one, if it inherently feels right to the people, and again, the people in the room are usually, I want to keep saying board members. They're clearly invested in the company and the brand, so they have a knowledge of it and a commitment to it. So they're going to have some kind of instinct about whether something is right or wrong. But secondly, you bench test by saying, well, does that work for this? Does that really work if we're going to be doing this? If our name, if for Uber, if we're basically cars, how can we have a tagline that's only about transportation if we're getting into food delivery? So you just, kick the tires until you feel like, okay, this makes sense. But, the classic story with naming was, and this is kind of an overused story, but, Steve Jobs, who was a client of mine for many years, he said that if we can't come up with a better name than Apple by 5 o'clock, we're calling the company Apple because we have way too much work to do to spend more time on it.
I have not actually heard that story, so I am so glad you shared it. No, that's weird. Yeah. I have every Apple product that exists also, by the way. Yeah. Hilarious that I've never heard it. But so how do you do, getting children to decide on the same dinner is difficult. How do you get, a bunch of people to actually go all in and feel like it's right, especially logical, data-driven? Well, what about, I don't know if that's going to be exactly what I want. Do they just go, that's good enough, like Steve did? Or in general, do you get everybody going, that is the right thing, I feel that, we're raring and ready to go?
Yeah, I would say the last thing you ever want to hear is that's good enough. You want to feel like that's right. And
especially after they hired you, I'm sure they're like, oh no, we want to hear that that's right part too.
And that's where it really gets interesting, because you're going into an environment where one was recently Rice Business School, a new client. And we started with about 8 people in the room, and we spent a day together, and we arrived at a place that they were all from very different disciplines at the business school, felt that was what it was. Mm-hmm. And I think, as I said before, part of it is a nonlinear sort of associative process. And when you get to a point where it's interesting, people react instinctively about what you're talking about. And again, they're already invested in the business school. So they have an understanding about why they're there and what the mission of the business school is. And when you help them get at a place that really concentrates and is very specific about what the brand wants to be and what it stands for, people get excited.
And you can probably see it, especially if you're in the room with them, where they're like,
No,
oh, I'm actually more engaged instead of like,
yeah.
Okay. So that's awesome. So if somebody, and again, of course, hire somebody who's better at this to facilitate, because I'm sure you sitting around with yourself, trying to pull out things from yourself and mediating the whole thing is probably way more difficult than having an outsider come in. That being said, let's say we have a really good thing. How do you thing, right? Whatever the words are, whatever the piece are, whatever that feels right piece, what do you do from there? Because it's more than just that. It's the holistic rest of the brand also, which does involve colors and other things too. How do you come up with that stuff?
Okay, so having just done this with another client, that opens up to a kind of a broader scope, which involves a designer, because that is the person who's charged with bringing it to life from a graphic standpoint. And the traditional rule, which is seldom adhered to, it's called 360-degree branding, which was an Ogilvy and Mather rule. I spent 7 years at Ogilvy and Mather in New York, and that rule wants to say that for every degree in the 360 degrees of exposure to customers or clients or consumers, you want to be 100% consistent, which is the consistency point of the three words I said earlier, about how the brand is expressed. In other words, if the brand is about cool, like Apple, whether it's an in-store experience, whether it's a website, whether it's a package, whether it's what the iPod feels like in my hand, it's got to all serve that mission of this is cool. Otherwise, it's off. People like to say all the time, it's off brand.
So, and that's the funny thing is, how do you determine what those things? I know you're amazing at this. So how does the layperson or somebody that's not as good as you are determine what this is? Because there's probably there's 360, right? Different potential aspects and ways that you could do this. How in depth do you think a small business owner should go in trying to really have this brand holistic and 360? Okay,
so the building blocks, I would say, a kind of a headline, are actually, the name of the company, and you can go to, I think they're called coin names. I think it's called a coin name because Google meant nothing before it means what it means to us now. Or the name can actually refer to, what's coming to mind is You Send It, which is it's now Hightail. But You Send It was the name of the company. It was about large file transfer over the internet. And the little logo was a paper airplane. So obviously, you start with the name of the company, and then beyond that, if you want to explore a tagline for the company, which like spreading ideas for TED, and then the brick and mortar for anything from a brand standpoint, in my opinion, are visuals or imagery and typography. That's kind of the brick and mortar of branding, and that is the domain of a designer, in my opinion. And there are great ones. I work with an incredible designer named Kristen Half, and she has an incredible sensibility, irrespective of what category the client is in. And she's the one that sort of takes it from that point and says, well, she creates what's called a style guide.
I love it. Okay, so I want to go back really quick to what you talked about for the naming.
Yep.
Business owners get hung up on naming all the time. Give us some distinctions on when we should do a coined business name versus when we should do more explanatory, and what types of business, if you could sort of hone in on that, and how long we should take, because sometimes people pull their hair out over this. But like with Apple, you're like, maybe we should just sort of go with what it works good enough for now. Not good enough, but like that works.
Yeah, because in the Apple story, I think Steve really loved the idea of calling a computer company a non-computer name, namely Apple. He just didn't want to burn a lot of cycles when they're as a startup on that. He wanted let's make a decision. If it's a better name, fine. Otherwise, we're going to call it Apple. But I'm kind of a fan of two things: either an actual name or a contraction that does actually refer to the essence of what it is you do, or something that's kind of unusual and incredibly easy to remember, like Pop or Wow or FedEx or because the easier it is to say and remember, the better. But I think uh, the perfect scenario, in my opinion, is when the name actually has an immediate association that everyone can understand that has to do with what it is you're doing.
That way it automatically comes to mind so you don't have to explain anything to them, especially for Google way back when we didn't use it as a verb. It's like, what the heck
Right.
is that? Oh, it's a search engine. Oh, awesome. And then you have to go from there.
So
How do you determine that though, based on especially trying to get the gosh darn domain name when you're naming it?
I was just going to say the same thing. And I work with a lot of technology startups, and that is the bugaboo. And the funny story I have about that is in 1994, because I spent 25 years in advertising and only on technology accounts. And that's why Steve was my client when he was running Next. And in 1994, I had a bet with Bob Metcalf, who's kind of the father of Ethernet, as to who could get their surname registered as a domain name first. So in 1994, I won the bet and I got Baldwin.com.
I was impressed when I saw that, by the way. Yes.
But the funny thing was, I couldn't put two and two together. I could have had any domain name I wanted. No one knew anything about. I could have had sex.com, business.com, lasvegas.com, mcdonalds.com, coke.com. No one knew anything. So what do? I effectively walk into this electronic store, I get Baldwin.com and walk out. So
See,
in answer to your question,
yes.
that is a trick. I try to work with clients where they can stick in the .com realm, because that there's still a little bit of not stigma, but when you start going to other suffixes, you somehow lose a little steam from a perception standpoint, I think. But that is really a tough thing now, because and what people end up doing is they'll go baldwincompany.com or michaelbaldwin.com or Baldwin in New York.com. So there are ways to get around it now, but unfortunately you're having to expand, because it's just literally, not only are things taken, but there's all those brokers out there who just buy up names.
Yep. I used to work for an internet company in 97, and I remember being like, why didn't I do this back? It was so silly. My last name is Masters. I want masters.com. That would have been awesome.
But I'm talking about 1994.
I know, go you. I just got my first computer at like 92, so I can't really say anything. So when we're looking at the suffix, do you think that there's more that are coming out that are better from a branding standpoint? Because I'll have people go like, I'll try and get the not the US, but they have all the weird ones nowadays. Is there any ones that you
AI.
think? Yeah, do you think any of those are up and coming, and we're not going to have the stigma on .coms later?
Yeah. I think we're still kind of early stages as far as that goes. We'll probably transcend suffixes at some point anyway. But I think the mental logistics associated with websites I think the Pavlovian behavior is fill in the blank.com.
Yep.
So if I know your name and I go .com and you're not there and you're not being redirected, it's going to be harder for me to find you. That's why .com is always like nice to have. But I think we're getting, we're kind of coming out of that. But the fact of the matter is, even with these 20-something startups, they all want .com URLs. So what they're doing, instead of going to an alternate suffix, they'll say like, one of them is Summit Sync. It's a startup where they can help you connect with the people who you're most likely to do business with at a business conference. So summitsynccompany.com. So that's like the plan, the patch, if you will.
So for now, that's like until we get past our bias, which makes sense.
Right.
Nobody uses .net anymore. Remember .net? Nobody even talks about that one anymore.
I do have one .net. It's getconnected.net, which AT&T uses. In their stores, you go and they always tell you Get Connected. I'm waiting for them to come and buy it.
Come on, baby.
Yeah.
What about changing your name? So what if when we started, we sort of threw something around. We're like, this is pretty good. And now you feel like you've evolved as a company and need to change your name. What do you suggest for people doing that?
I just did that with a client, a startup real estate company they're up to, I think, over 100 employees. And the founders are in their 20s, both with Yale. And I had been telling them that I hated their name for about 2 years. And they finally got to the point where they were willing to bring me in. And I spent with the founders and the key people, I think we had 5 meetings. And the name was sweetie.com, and now they're called triplemint.com, and they're in the real estate business. So in the real estate
Triple mint
vernacular,
is cool.
there's
Oh, yeah.
the property is mint, but if it's really and it's super amazing, it's triple mint. So it's using the vernacular of the industry that they're in.com. And they were able to buy the URL.
Is amazing. Yeah, so triple mint is, you could see what you did there. I love it. Not
Yeah,
that it
yeah.
wasn't cool that they had the .com beforehand. So what makes a bad name? How do we know if we have a bad name or not?
I think a bad name, it's sort of like if you can't put it this way, if I can't connect the dots between what I know it is that you do and the name that you've created, or worse, if the name that you've created it will never have a trajectory to what it is that you do, I think that's a bad name. However, if you're going coined,
Which is different,
then
yes.
it could be anything. Obviously it makes a difference. But if the choice were mine, I always like to try to come up with a name that is a telescopic, immediate giveaway as to what it is that you do.
I love that. Don't make us think too much, please, right?
Exactly.
Because most people won't. Okay.
Yeah.
So once you start trying to pay attention to, and I'm assuming most people here will hire a designer, just like we were talking about beforehand. Like, I don't do my own PowerPoints. So how do I explain to a designer exactly what we want? Besides the fact you have an amazing designer that probably gets it. But if we don't have somebody as good as you, how do we really try and show them or tell them to create what we want? So that way we can direct them in the right way, so we don't have to go through 17 iterations before we find something that we like.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to my two building blocks, the brick and mortar of branding, for lack of a better way of referring to them, typography and imagery. So if you were a client and we had arrived at a name for you, and we decided whether or not we wanted a tagline for, we already have one, Eventual Millionaire,
Mm-hmm.
then the question would be, okay, let's now engage the designer who's going to say, okay, this is the fontography or the font I think is perfect for what it is you're doing. And fonts are like wine, or clothing. Fonts are incredibly expressive. So fonts and then imagery is unbelievably expressive. So when you pick both and you're consistent, then over time you have this incredible miracle that takes place, which is you start to occupy the same place in consumers' minds. Because where do brands live? They live in the minds of the consumer. And you get consistency over time, which is why 40 years after the ultimate driving machine, people know the badge, the BMW badge, and they know that line because they're still using it. So I would say before you ventured out to do a deck, for example, in Keynote or PowerPoint, you would be providing that person with your font library, like mine's Gotham, and a primer on the images that you like. Are the humans in pictures or humans not in pictures? Is it modern? Is it black and white? Is it, someone would have done that work. So all the person who's doing the deck for you, those two gigantic things are already done for them.
See, I love that. We spent thousands with the new website redesign. We spent thousands on typography, and I came from art and tech, so I know the importance. This guy was so obsessed with typography, and I was so happy because most people don't get that at all. That makes a huge thing with your entire website. So I'm so glad you brought that up because I didn't even realize how big of a deal it was before I was in art. Like even my logo is more about the periodic table, like of how things are going. So we went like all heck into the branding side of it. But it's like, where do you stop? Especially if you don't have somebody that really knows these people do $30,000, $40,000, $125,000 websites. They know this stuff really, really well. Small business owners can't afford that much usually for their website. So how much do we direct versus how much we don't? Are we just like, that looks good enough, I really like that, as long as the owner likes it? Is that on brand, or is it we just don't know our stuff, so we don't know?
I would again caution against any expression or attitude that has to do with good enough, because that's just what's the point if you're not gonna do it right? Why do it? But I would say that if you want to be, these days there's Wix, there's WordPress, there's lots of really easy templated website packages out there, but the differentiation comes. If we both used Wix, for example, my typography is not going to look like yours.
Yep.
My imagery is not going to look like yours. And I'm probably not going to, if we were side by side blindfolded or separated, I'm probably not going to pick the same template that you might pick.
Yep.
So if you imagine in the context of a website, which I like to think of more as an electronic business card these days, that the person who goes there, if you think about the typography exposure and the imagery exposure they're going to get, provided in this case they're using a template, one of the many that Wix offers, for example, that's 95% of the experience of what your company is, who you are.
So thankful, because I used to build websites back in 97. So thankful we have that nowadays, because the amount of a tech trying to make it design worthy was ridiculously horrible back then. And we are so lucky nowadays.
Yeah, I think those are also very, very different sensibilities and skill sets. A web designer or a person who's a programmer, let's face it, because in the programming languages, with is it CSS and HTML5. So that's a moving target, but that's a technology skill set.
Yeah.
The designer skill set is a totally different sensibility. That's why you usually have both.
Yeah, well, that's why usually they have to be two different. I was voted most artistic in high school, and I was a programmer. That is so rare. You can't. Everybody says that they can do both. Nobody can. I can't even, right. and I still have those skill sets, and I still can't do either as good as one on each. So I really appreciate that. I do just definitely want to talk about your book for just a second, because I love the pieces of this, especially because I'm speaking twice in the next week coming up. So maybe you can give me some tips in general, because you actually in the book it talks not only about the imagery, but also to try and simplify, like you were saying at the beginning. So can you just give us towards the end some hardcore tips on what makes a really good presentation that's simple and easy to understand from an audience point of view?
I would say two things right out of the box. One is to not skip over the step which has to do with who your audience is and what the collective mindset of the audience is, and in particular, what can you anticipate the resistance in that audience might be to what it is you're talking about. And everyone wants to skip that step. Well, it's just the the junior league, or it's just Vietnam veterans, or it's just housewives. It's the first mistake people make. They assume in this generalized way, without even really thinking about it much, what the mindset of the audience is. If they're even thinking about the mindset of the audience, or just choosing a label. That's the first thing. And then secondly, and this is the most important one, is you have to figure out what I call your crystal clear objective is. And in the way I teach and with working with clients, that phrase always begins with the same two words, which is to convince an audience of something. Because every audience in the book, the organizing principle of the book is a presentation is no more complicated, metaphorically speaking, than putting an audience in a car, metaphorically speaking, and you're driving them from point A to point B. So figure out what the two words want to be. Point A might be, they don't know Jaime, they don't know you at all, they know nothing about what you do. Point B wants to be, they want to have you come speak at their conference, they're very excited, they're very motivated, inspired. So your job is to make sure you get them from point A to point B, and that's where the presentation opportunity is.
Yes, which is why everyone should get the book, because we can't go through all the pieces of it. But that in that example that you had, that's more the inspiration, motivation. Sometimes you're teaching though, right? And sometimes point B is like, I need them to understand these things in teaching. But the problem that I see with speaking in general, or with speakers, is that the amalgam of the audience, especially at specific events or something like that, can be very different. It isn't like housewives, or it isn't one specific thing. So how can you figure out what the whole is? I ask questions before I speak, but it's still disjointed usually. Well, some people have this level of experience and some people have this level, and it's kind of like this. And it's hard to get that holistic one message that's going to be great for all of them, because you have to simplify it and dumb it down. I just wrote a post on this, as you can tell. I've been thinking a lot about this lately. So tell me how we can do that better. Okay.
So I think you do have the luxury and the right to have a point of view about a topic. And not everyone's going to agree with you, and not everyone will be as fluent in that topic as you're going to be. So you have that right and that opportunity if you're speaking. I think what's incumbent upon the speaker at the same time, however, is to have an appreciation and empathy for varying levels of fluency regarding the topic, and for different points of view.
It's okay. I can't hear them very well. Don't worry about it.
But having said that, what I find, I've been teaching now with my own practice for 6 years. So my job always is to remove what I refer to as any points of cognitive friction. So if I presented a concept, let's say it was an hour with 50 people, and 3 people in the group didn't get it, I make a point of understanding why they didn't get it and what about it they didn't get, so that when I go back the next time, I've removed those little bits of cognitive friction so that all 50 people get it. So my job, my deliverable, is that not only will everyone in the room understand the concept, but they'll also be actionably better on the topic walking out of the room, even if it's just 1 hour. I mean, I just get a thing that actually was in Austin for the educational conference, and I had about 165 people for an hour. And my brief, my deliverable, was to make sure that all 165 people on the 3 things I covered, or 4, could walk out if they had to do something the next day and be better at it.
I love that you put that responsibility on you instead of blaming the audience, because no offense, people are like, they just didn't get it. Or like, oh, well, half of them didn't understand. They just weren't my people. And they blame that, even though it's your responsibility as a speaker that's the group they bring in. That's what makes, to me, that's what makes really, really great speakers versus really, really not so great speakers as we're going. And that responsibility is really impressive also. I know we have to start wrapping up soon. Darn. So I'm so glad that we actually got a chance to do this interview after a few times. I really, really appreciate it. Let me ask the last question. It's, what's one action listeners can take this week to help move them forward towards their goal of 1 million?
I would say get absolute clarity about who you are and what your mission is. And if you have things like the name of the company that are asynchronous or not aligned, I'll use that as a better word, is to as quickly as you can make sure there's alignment between who you are, why you started the business you started, and what your mission is. And to the extent that that is not 100% in alignment, you're going to have a harder time getting to 1 million.
One of my favorite words is alignment. This is all about the energy centers and alignment. My necklace also, alignment to me is huge. And most of the time we won't pay attention to the foundational stuff because we just think that's, we'll get to that eventually. That's the working on the business. I got to get the money and the revenue. And you're like, well, it's way easier if you get that first part done first.
Right.
And then we can explain to customers so you don't have all the resistance, and it saves you time in the long run. I'm so glad. Working with corporations, it's not just about they can pay extra money for it. It's everybody that should do this. So thank you so much, Michael. We already know that you got the domain name baldwin.com. Is that where we should go to get your book and to find out more about you?
Yes, Baldwin.com is where you can find out about the book, about what I do. I work with individuals. I work with teams. It doesn't matter what business you're in. I work with startups, and one big part of what I do for all my clients is what we just talked about. Because you might think that a Fortune 50 company has that alignment worked out. In many, many, many cases, that's not the case at all.
That makes us feel so much better, Michael. Thank you very, very much. Because we're like, we don't have the resources. And those corporations actually have the resources and still aren't aligned and are still making really great money. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that first. I'm saying it's easier if you do it. And thank you so much. Everybody, of course, if it's aligned for you to hire Michael, go check him out. But even just check out his book because it will help you recreate your presentations. And we need to change most people's presentations in this world. Most of them suck. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that interview. And if you want to check out more amazing resources, I'm only curating the best of the best. Go check out eventualmillionaire.com. You can take the Eventual Millionaire quiz, figure out where you are in business and what you need right now. Plus, you can look at curated resources specifically for you on the new Start Here page. I'm so excited. Please join us. Please let me know if you need anything at all. I'm here for you. And have a fantastic day. Bye.